Hey guys, I'm so glad you could join me. Let's talk about how Emmanuel Macron has finally figured out how to deal with Russia. He has put forth a policy in dealing with that country that is the only policy that can prevent World War III and that can help Ukraine liberate its territory from the genocidal invasion and occupation of certain parts of that country. To recap, the policy of Europe and the West, Europe and the United States, to date has been one of limiting themselves artificially, stating they will not do certain things in the future, even though they don't know what Russia's escalations or further outrageous conduct at that point in time is going to be. Specifically with respect to putting boots on the ground, the United States and Western Europe and NATO have been clear they're not going to put any of their troops on the ground in any capacity, training, combat, or whatever else. Now, this is something that Macron has departed from, and I think it's the right path. In fact, it's the only path that hasn't failed, and I'll explain why in a moment. What Macron has said is, you know what? We don't know what the future holds. We're not going to artificially limit our military involvement in Ukraine. We may use our troops, we may use our military equipment to either help Ukraine in a supporting role, to help them in a combat role, or to help them in a training role, or all three. We just don't know, but we're not going to limit ourselves ahead of time. This has created a little bit of a rift with the United States and some other members of NATO and Western Europe who said, unequivocally, they're going to stick to the old policy of none of their troops going into Ukraine. However, Canada, Czech Republic, and Estonia have essentially joined with Macron and said, look, again, we don't know the future, so we're not going to artificially limit ourselves. This is the only policy that could possibly work and the only policy that's going to prevent World War III, and I'll explain why. In another one of my videos, I showed how the myth of Russian escalation is just that. It's a myth. Every time Russia has done something outrageous during Putin's reign, the insufficient response of the West, of the United States, has caused him to go up the escalation ladder. This is contrary to how the United States, NATO, and European members think themselves. They treat Putin like he's a civilized person, and he's not. He's an amoral, lunatic psychopath. When he sees that he does something outrageous, whether it's poisoning a presidential candidate of Ukraine, whether it's the Second Chechen War, whether it's poisoning the Skripals with a WMD inside the United Kingdom, a NATO country, when there is an insufficient response to that, that's an invitation for him to do something more. He is going to keep going until you make him stop. That's sort of the barbaric Russian way. And that's why we are where we are. And the escalation ladder that Putin has gone up, he's gone so far, there's very little room left, okay? If we started down here, we're right here. Invasions of other countries, poison, trying to complete a fraudulent impeachment of Joe Biden in the United States. And the next step is going to be clearing out Ukraine, committing a Rwandan level plus genocide in that country, and then invading Western Europe, which is where all hell's going to break loose. And of course, that's not to diminish that all hell has already broken loose in eastern Ukraine and in the cities of Ukraine that are subjected to the industrial scale genocide and war crimes by Russia and its military machine. So we have to change course. Not only has the prior policy of appeasement and de-escalation not worked, it has put us in a much more dangerous place. That's why we are where we are. If the Macron policy had been the uniform or even the majority policy of the United States and Western Europe and the NATO allies 5 years ago, even 2 or 3 years ago, we might not even have we probably would not have, actually, I should say, the invasion of Ukraine by Russia that's going on right now. And many, many lives would have been saved. And the other thing is, I think Europe is realizing that America is an unreliable partner. Russia, Donald Trump, Russia owns Donald Trump. Donald Trump owns MAGA. Russia appears to be potentially in control of Marjorie Taylor Greene, Jim Jordan, James Comer, all the sort of MAGA luminaries, if you will, who spout Russian disinformation, who rely upon a Russian spy in order to try to fraudulently impeach the President of the United States based upon false evidence. So Macron in Europe are saying, we can't rely upon the United States, so we shouldn't be limited by them either. And it's also very important to understand this context. It is not really escalatory what Macron is saying. He's just saying, I can't predict the future, and I'm not going to artificially limit myself. And that should be the policy of every country with respect to every country, for the most part, unless there's some kind of long history of diplomatic relations and trust. You see, look at what Russia does, okay? That's really the framework you need to look at to determine whether this is unduly escalatory or unduly provocative. Don't compare it to the past policy of France and the West and NATO. Compare it to what the opponent's doing. I mean, that's the only logical way to do it, right? So on one hand, you have France and a few other members in the West saying, we're not going to artificially limit ourselves. We're not going to say we won't use, the military or combat forces, to help Ukraine if things change in the future. Canada has limited it to a training role, but they've also agreed that they could put troops in Ukraine, just to be clear. So it's Canada, Estonia, and Czech Republic who have basically agreed with France with that one caveat. So that's all they're saying. We're not going to predict the future. We're not going to limit ourselves. On the other hand, like way up here in like psycho crazy land, you have Russia through Medvedev and through its state media shows threatening a nuclear war like literally almost every single week. In another video about the myth of Russian escalation, I provided an actual list on the page. I did a screenshot of it and put it up for a while. You could see all the nuclear threats that Russia's made, and it's like 3 or 4 pages, okay? And to be clear, when a state media source, or actually when any person comes on TV or radio or the internet from Russia on some kind of official show, that is really Vladimir Putin speaking. And the reason I say that is there's no free speech in Russia. If you say something that's not sanctioned or not authorized, you're hauled off to jail, disappeared, killed pretty quickly. So when you have these long-term media figures making these threats, amplifying nuclear war, along with Medvedev, that is the official policy in effect of Russia. So to recap, what Macron is doing is, number one, the only right policy that hasn't failed. Number two, it's the only policy that's going to keep us out of from going to this last step of escalation, because we're at the very end. We're out of room to screw up. It's going to keep us out of World War III. Okay, it's going to keep Ukraine from suffering a historic Rwandan plus level genocide of its people, because if Russia sweeps across Ukraine, millions will die. I promise you that. And there's a bunch of reasons for that. That's for another video. And number three, it's not actually escalatory as it relates to what Russia's been doing. Okay? We're still way below their craziness. I want to thank Emmanuel Macron for finally seeing the light, doing the right thing. Better late than never. There's still plenty of lives that could be saved if we, in the West, together start doing the right thing. Thanks for watching. I hope you can like and subscribe. If you have any comments, I will be happy to reply. I try to have engagement with people, whether they agree or disagree with me. If you think I'm wrong, tell me. It's good to have a dialogue, and we want to reach the right result for the world. Love you guys. God bless Ukraine, and have a great night.